Public CEO Report is a podcast that provides insights about the public sector and public policy for the benefit of decision makers and leaders powering our communities. I'm your host, Ryder Todd Smith, and today we're joined by Mark Douglas, CEO of LCPtracker. Mark, welcome to the Public CEO Report.
Thank you, Ryder. I'm excited to be here and talking with you.
Well, that's what we do best here at Public CEO Report is we have chat. So let's engage in a chat. First of all, what is LCPtracker?
Well, we're a prevailing wage, labor compliance, workforce development software tool that public agencies and contractors use all over the country to comply and enhance their workforce compliance and workforce development efforts around the country for construction projects.
So it sounds like you're in multiple states?
We are. We're across. We have a heavy presence in California, but we are nationally. We have offices in Michigan, Texas, and California.
Okay, so you're spread all over the place.
Yeah. We have lots of accounts all over the country. Yeah.
That is a pretty esoteric niche piece of software. What and how did you find yourself in this world of software and being a CEO executive with a software company?
Well, I resold other people's software for a number of years, and I was actually on an airplane, and I read an ad about an article about California passing more prevailing wage labor compliance laws for all the school districts. And I decided I'd get my hand in software development and offer that software to school districts in California, and that's what got me launched, and kind of quickly grew into cities and counties and airports and transit agencies, and then tons of contractors use it to help them submit their information to these agencies. So it grew from an idea to help automate a manual paper process.
Well, anytime you see a bunch of paperwork around, I'm sure you salivate as a tech CEO trying to figure out how to turn that paperwork into ones and zeros and digitally.
Yeah, it's we solve a problem for both the contractor user who needs to submit information to an agency, and then the agency gets it in a very digestible format, all tracked, and they are able to comply a lot easier with what the agency wants them to do. So it's a win-win for kind of everybody, including the worker.
So I think that kind of leads into a recent op-ed you wrote that talked about the benefits of workforce programs for city and county agencies. Could you talk a little bit more about how workforce programs are being leveraged by public agencies and whatnot?
Yeah, actually, I'm actually super excited about this topic, and that's the reason I took this podcast with you, because I think it's an incredible opportunity for this country to do some wonderful work. And I think as we get through this, you'll begin to understand why workforce programs are so beneficial to a local community, but to poverty, to America as a whole. These workforce programs are being utilized by public works agencies who are building roads or airports or any kind of infrastructure. And what they do is they say, hey, we want to make sure our local community is benefiting from this construction project, and they can keep it very simple or they can have it more complex. But what they're really doing is they're saying, hey, we want to hire people in our community that need these construction projects. And because construction also requires apprenticeship, it kind of fits really good, because you can bring new people into the industry through apprenticeship, through a capital fund that's going to be spent anyway. So you have money being spent on construction projects that's going to get spent. So there's no new taxes, there's no new increase in a burden on society. It's actually taking people out of welfare and into a career. And this is why these workforce programs are being so successful. And I've been blessed with the opportunity to work with hundreds of these agencies. Really what happened is my software was built to do the labor compliance. And then I learned that my agencies began using it to help them with their workforce programs. And so I learned that, oh my gosh, we're doing something more significant than just solving a compliance problem. We are actually helping a lot of people get hired that need the work. and then they get off welfare, and now they're tax-paying citizens, and they're raising families. And so I've seen this for 15 years now, and so I've got a lot of experience with all my different clients' programs and how they do it. And like I say, they're from simple to very complex.
Right. So, I mean, these workforce programs, this is obviously more than just software, right? Like this is, never mind the holistic societal implications, but was your first exposure just through stumbling across how agencies were using the software for these purposes? Or what was your kind of moment where you became aware of these programs?
Well, that's a great story. And I'll tell you. So I was an entrepreneur, a businessman. I was building my software to make money and, do some good, automate process and, help contractors, help the agencies. And one day I was in New York City with one of my consultants who was a very big proponent of my software, and she was doing workforce development using my software. And I said, well, why do you like my software so much? And her name was Veronica Soto, and she told me this story about Moses. And I like Moses. It was a modern day Moses. It was a young man aging out of foster care. And she was able to go and enroll him into an apprenticeship program because he was 17 3/4. He was about to age out, and he didn't know what he was going to do. And foster care kids, 40, 50% of them end up either in jail or homeless or pregnant within the first 3 years of their aging out.
Right.
So foster care is a key target towards these workforce programs. So what she did is got this young man a job, and she said, Mark, your software empowers me to show the politicians that this is a meaningful tool. I'm able to track the people that we're helping, and I'm able to show the economic benefit to the community. That's why your software is so important to me. And that's the moment of transition for me. I was like, I didn't realize that I was doing something way more important than, building a company. So I think it was about 9 years ago that I was doing a lot of workforce stuff 10, 12, 15 years ago for my clients, but I didn't realize the impact we were having till I heard that story. And then once I heard that story, I doubled down on investment and said, I'm going to really make sure I give every tool I can to my clients. So it's not me doing this, but I get to be a tool that I can help other people do these programs. And so my goal is I make the best software to give them the best tools to prove to their politicians that this program is working for that particular client.
So it was really the kind of human impact story that resonated with you about this.
It was. And then I've subsequently met dozens of similar stories. I've watched my clients, every client has these stories, and literally I have hundreds of these clients. So these are tens and tens of thousands of these people across the country in the last decade that have gotten these careers. So I get to be part of that, which is really awesome.
You made earlier reference to going beyond the human factor, I suppose. You made earlier reference to kind of economic developments in communities and pulling people out of poverty and hiring local workers. Can you maybe talk a little bit more? What are those local impacts of workforce programs?
Yeah. So what happens is, let me give you a couple examples. You've got some programs that are really complex, and they offer all kinds of services, and they're very, very successful, such as Hire LAX, which is a LAWA, Los Angeles World Airport. San Francisco has a program called OEWD, which is really, awesome. Both those programs are incredible. They onboard people and they provide supportive services. They have case managers that ensure that they're following up with the people that are getting placed on careers. They're partnered with contractors to make sure they get work for the city or the airport. These are incredibly well-run programs, and they use our software for that. But there's also a lot of agencies that do simpler programs. One of our clients, City of Seattle, did a priority hire, and they said, hey, we just want to hire anybody that lives below the poverty line. and we want 20% of our workers to, and it was a major waterfront project that they were doing, I think $250 million. And they said, we want 20% of the workforce to be living below the poverty line. And I believe that project's done and over with, but they hit 22%, I think, is what I recall. But again, they pick a target, they say, we want to help these individuals, and then they work with the contractors, they'll work with ABC or AGC or the unions, the building trades, and they'll ensure that these workers get hired from those targeted groups. So then you get a worker coming out of poverty who gets a career in an apprenticeship with a contractor who then has a new worker, which they need anyway, because you got to constantly, shuffle the workforce, and you people are retiring, and actually there's a lot more construction than there was 10 years ago too. So we actually had, I think the construction workforce has gone up by almost 2 million workers in the last decade. So you gotta onboard new workers. So it's just a great opportunity for these agencies to look at different ways to do it. A lot of them just say, hey, we're going to put this mandate on the contractor. We want to make sure you have a certain number of women or veterans, foster care, formerly incarcerated, hire from a certain zip code. It's all kinds of different ways they do it. And sometimes it's very simple and easy to implement. You just mandate that this project has, a certain percentage of women hired, 1% to 2% have to be hired, because a lot of women like to get into construction, but they don't often get the opportunity. So when you set a goal for a contract or a project, all the contractors will hire a certain percentage of veterans, and they're monitoring it with a good technology tool. And it doesn't have to be ours. I'm really promoting the fact, do work. You got to use a tool, because then you can show the results and hold the contractors accountable for meeting that goal. Right. And that's how you got to have a tool in order to do that. Otherwise, if you're not really monitoring or reporting on it, then it doesn't often get done.
So really, these workforce programs are capable of being deployed by any public agency, particularly if they're doing large capital projects. And it could be capital projects specifically, or it could be all capital spending by that particular agency, correct?
Yeah, down to, you get too small of projects and it's a little harder to, invest the time and energy into that. But, I'd say anything over a $10 or $20 million capital budget annually you should be able to do a workforce program.
Mm-hmm. When doing these programs, like as you described, if you're bringing a bunch of people into a profession they otherwise haven't been exposed to, theoretically, there's a bunch of training or knowledge gap there. How do you address those issues in a workforce program?
So, like the Hire LAX program at LAWA, they started this Hire LAX, which is a pre-apprenticeship program. So I'm going to talk about a little bit more complex one. Sure. And I'll talk about a more simple way. So the more complex workforce programs that are out there will often have a pre-apprenticeship program. It's like a boot camp. So this boot camp will bring candidates in, and they call them cohorts. They might bring 30 or 40 or 50 cohort people into a cohort, and then they'll put them through a 6, 8, 10, 12-week training program. They'll introduce them to the construction trades. They'll give them, basic math, basic construction, read a blueprint, really get them ready to actually enter an apprenticeship program. And so that is a very useful way to really kind of get them the basic training. Then what the agency will do is make sure they've got contractors bought into the public works construction. So LAWA's got, I think, well over $14 billion going into their airport expansion. I know it's gone up from there, but they'll say, hey, we want you 300, 400, 500 contractors that are working on our $14 billion program to agree that you're going to hire some from our pool at Hire LAX. So then they put out placement, and then contractors pick up these apprentices because they're pre-prepared with the boot camp. They've got some basic skills they desire. And then on top of that, Hire LAX will, in San Francisco, will do the same. They'll have supportive services where they'll team with, colleges and universities and local nonprofits that might be providing assistance for housing or anger management consulting or, all kinds of things. So they try to overcome the barriers of someone that, someone coming out of formerly incarcerated might have anger management issues. So there's all kinds of groups that will they can send them to and sponsor and do that work for them. So these complex or more broad workforce programs will encompass all those kinds of things. Whereas the simpler ones would be more like, hey, we're going to put this on the contractor. But that works pretty well too, because when you say, hey, Mr. Contractor, we want you to commit to 20 or 30% of the workforce coming out of our local area, and a certain percentage being foster care or veterans or something, right? Well, the contractors, most of them are well-versed in apprenticeship, and they'll bring that candidate in and enroll them in an apprenticeship program, and they'll take the responsibility to train them into a career. So it's also very successful. They tend not to deal with the more harder cases that these other broader programs can do, but both are very successful, highly successful.
Is this entire philosophy or I guess approach in workforce development programs and whatnot, is it always linked to prevailing wage, or is that just kind of one potential factor? But even if you're a city that doesn't otherwise adhere to prevailing wage, you could still, for example, use LCPtracker to track other criteria you're looking for in terms of the workforce that you're seeking to employ.
So the prevailing wage laws for compliance really is a kind of a big catalyst for having this happen, because prevailing wage also requires apprenticeship. It requires, this commitment to, the training of the people. So that is a big catalyst. And it's also a way to make sure contractors are all complying with these labor laws, and then they add the workforce component to it. But it's actually growing beyond that. Like SoFi Stadium was in our system, and that was a completely privately funded, non-prevailing wage project. But Los Angeles and Inglewood put workforce requirements on it that they end up using our system to track, because Los Angeles was giving lots of incentives for that to be built there. So the developers agreed, yeah, we'll hire locally, we'll hire and we'll bring in veterans. And so we have a lot of private projects now that are actually have the same kind of workforce components, and they don't necessarily have the prevailing wage. So this is an idea that is kind of grassroots that's spreading, because you're seeing significant economic gain. Just throw a few stats at you. If you take a person out of welfare, you will get 1.6 to 6 times the economic gain in your community, because you're taking someone who's taking money and now they're becoming a taxpayer. And so they start turning that money over in the community. And so that depending on where they live and how much they contribute, but there's all kinds of studies that say it's somewhere between 2.0 and 6.0 economic gain to the community. So if you look at Higher LAX, they've graduated 500 people now that came from Inglewood, Lenox, Hawthorne, all around the airport. So 500 people are now not getting welfare. They're getting paid 30, 40. I think the top, we track all the wages. I think the top paying guy is now like $70 an hour, might be an electrician or something. I can't remember, but they get significantly good wages, and they become, middle class or even upper middle class workers. And then their kids benefit from that, because they are now raising kids that are going to school that are going to get careers. So it's a domino effect.
Yeah, well, certainly. I particularly just from a societal perspective, converting somebody who's in a troubled course and getting them with purpose and work, and then work that, creates shelter and food and can provide for a family, is a monumental shift in trajectory in one's life, and helps one avoid all sorts of other societal costs that I'm sure once avoided have massive ROI for society. So I well understand. A good paying purposeful job is good for the soul, I guess I would say, and good for society.
Yeah, so true. A workforce program is not doling out money. It's teaching the person how to work.
Yeah.
And they take a job. It's not giving them money. It's going, we're going to give you a job. We're going to teach you to fish. instead of giving you the fish. So, and that's what's so beautiful about it. It's money that's already being spent on construction projects, and you're bringing people in that aren't working or need a career, and they start working.
How, so, this is all roses and puppy noses right now. So what's the negative, right? What's the challenge to starting a workforce program, or what's the downside risk of doing so? Is that will certain contractors just avoid it? Does it increase net costs at the margin? What's the hot take on that from your perspective?
I guess my bias is now there's really very little downside. Occasionally you find there's it's hard to hire some of the goals that they might set. Maybe they set a goal for 5% women, and that's just not likely going to happen. So maybe they can't meet the goals that are being set. But if you set a reasonable workforce goal for your community, there's really no downside. You're spending the money on the construction project anyway. You're asking the contractors to train people in your community into a career that is going to be working on your project you're funding, that is going to be paid for anyway at the exact same amount. There's no change in the dollars, right? And prevailing wage laws require, most of the time it's 1 per 4 journeymen has to be an apprentice. So you already have these rules and laws that they got to follow anyway. So why not direct that money towards your community for your apprentices to be onboarded, rather than maybe an outside contractor bringing in whoever he wants from another county, and maybe not the same demographics that maybe they're bringing all middle class people already in. And I mean, there is some bias to the fact that you're trying to hire the people in your community, but there's no bias from a standpoint of race, religion, sex. It's about your community. Right? You want to focus the dollars in your community that you're going to benefit from, and you're spending the money from your community. It's why not?
Well, I'm certainly aware of having seen plenty of survey data on this. Community members like to know that the money that's being spent is being spent locally and not being spent elsewhere. Especially when if there's sales tax revenues that are being raised and they're going to be spent locally on local vendors and whatnot, there's a certain attraction for that as well, because it just feels like they're reinvesting in their own community. So I can well appreciate that and understand the public's perception on that, and frankly, the elected officials' perspective on that as well. If there were a public agency for city and county agencies that were contemplating establishing a workforce program, what are their first steps they would take if they wanted to really understand that?
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things they probably want to do to implement one. They probably want to maybe interview some of the programs that are out there, and they got to decide how many services they want to provide. Do they want to be complex and offer supportive services and all these things like Hire LX does in San Francisco and others, or do they want to be more simple or somewhere in the middle? And I think once you start one, I would just suggest you start one simple. Just start with the requirement for contractors to hire locally, and there's lots of people that are doing that. They can interview numerous cities, counties across the country that do that, and then gradually increase that compliance. If you get some funding to actually create a program, you want to build partnerships with the local nonprofits and your local trade schools and your ABCs and AGC and the building trades. The building trades are incredible at providing, apprenticeship for our workforce. They are nobody does it better than them. They have, I think, 1,800 different training facilities across the country. It is our university system for construction. Mm-hmm. So you definitely want to team with the building trades in that sense and help get your apprentices onboarded. But it's both union and non-union. It's open shop. It's everybody's starting to migrate towards this. So I'd say there's no bias to it in that sense. It's really about your local community. Figure out how much you want to do to start with, and then start with something. Start with a single project. Take your next big project and go, let's implement some kind of a workforce program with it. and make it simple. It could be just, hey, certain number of percentages have to be from the local area.
Right. And if they want to do that, then, and I realize this is more about workforce development than necessarily talking about your software, but theoretically, if your software to be used to help track on achieving those metrics, is that something that the agency contracts with you for, or is the contractor contract with you for that?
Most of the time, whoever's doing the workforce program is going to contract with us, because then they're going to require the contractor to submit all their data through our system.
Okay.
And then by doing that, they're able to automatically track the performance of that contract. So like what happens is we and sometimes it's the prime, because the agency will say, hey, we just awarded you a $100 million contract. We want you to report on the workforce reporting. And then so they'll come to us and go, oh, yeah, you've got a great tool. We'll use you to do that, because all the subs have to comply with the prime to meet these goals that the agency sets. So it could be the agency or the prime typically. And then what happens is, by using our prevailing wage software, we're able to collect data on every worker. So we can then report back to the agency like instantly how they're doing on a week by week basis with the performance of the goals. And so, and then the contractor's held responsible to make sure all the subs are complying, because they're able to see the results weekly. So they don't get to the end of the project and go, oh, we forgot about that set of goals, and oh, too late. So
right.
That's why our software works so good, because it comes in weekly, and it's being monitored as it's happening.
Yeah, well, I can certainly attest the impact of when you start measuring things, people pay attention. Like, it has a dramatic impact on perceptions. So, and it demonstrates where the priorities are for the organization. Before I get into a final question about how people get a hold of you, any other closing thoughts you want to share before we wrap this up?
I do. I want to thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm a big proponent of these, and my goal here is not to sell my software. My goal is to get people to do more workforce programs, and if I can help them, I will. But there's other software out there they can use too. But I want to reiterate, this is not a welfare program. This is not no taxes. This does not cost any more. It's simply taking what we're already doing and enhancing the opportunity and ability to provide careers to the most distressed people in your community. And it works. I got 15 years of experience, in every single workforce program we've monitored virtually meets the goals that they've set. It's incredible how, when you're monitoring it weekly and you're reporting on it weekly, the contractors perform, and they hire the people you ask them to hire. Yeah. So it should be done by every major construction public works project, I believe.
Okay. Mark, how do people get a hold of you? What's your email? What's your preferred means of communicating with you? What's your favorite TikTok account that they should be catch you doing a TikTok dance on?
Yeah, no, LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn under CEO, and then LCPtracker.com. We're very well known on the web. We're, like I said, we're all over the country, and so we're pretty well branded. You should be able to find me really easily, and you can connect on our website. There's a opportunity to do that. And if you just want to email me, mdouglas@lcptracker.com. I'd be glad to take your email and respond in any way I can.
Great. And that's today's report. My thanks to Mark for joining us. From the whole PublicCEO team and myself, Ryder Todd Smith, thank you for your time. We hope you learned something new and inspiring that will help you in your public service. Remember, PublicCEO has a daily newsletter that is free to those who sign up at PublicCEO.com. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of the PublicCEO Report. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing across all of our platforms so you never miss out on this great content. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Amazon Music.